The conference room smelled like ozone and expensive, unearned confidence. It was one of those fishbowl rooms, all glass and brushed aluminum, designed to make everyone inside feel exposed and everyone outside feel excluded. At the head of the table sat Chad. Chad was 25 years old. He wore a Patagonia fleece vest over a t-shirt that cost more than my first car, and he had the kind of teeth that looked like they'd been whitened by a nuclear blast. He was our new CTO. He had been on the job for 3 weeks, and in that time, his primary contribution had been replacing the breakroom coffee with a kombucha tap and referring to our mainframe, the iron beast that processed $2 billion a day, as tech debt. Patricia, Chad said, leaning back in his Herman Miller chair, spinning a pen that he probably didn't know how to refill. We need to talk about velocity. We need to talk about agility. We need to talk about the legacy anchor. He meant me. I was the anchor. I sat there, hands folded on the table, looking at him. I'm 61. I've been with this bank since before Chad was a gleam in his private equity father's eye. I wrote the batch processing scripts that handle the overnight settlements in 1989. I survived the dot-com bust, the 2008 financial crisis, and 3 different CEOs who thought blockchain was the answer to a question nobody asked. I don't smoke, but sitting across from Chad, I felt the phantom itch of a nicotine addiction I never had. I wanted to blow smoke in his face just to see if he'd cough up his avocado toast. Go on, Chad, I said. My voice was calm. It's the voice I use when a server rack overheats. Tell me about the anchor. Look, Pat, he said. He called me Pat. Nobody calls me Pat. You're a legend, seriously. The work you did on the COBOL core, historic, but we're pivoting, we're going cloud native. Microservices, Kubernetes, we need builders, not maintainers, and frankly, your salary band? Well, it's heavy. We can hire 3 full-stack devs for what you're costing us. He smiled. It was a pity smile. The kind you give a dog right before you take it behind the shed. So, he continued, sliding a thick envelope across the table. We've put together a transition package. It's generous, early retirement, honorary emeritus status. You get to walk away a hero. I looked at the envelope. I didn't reach for it. By the way, if you're enjoying watching a corporate dinosaur about to metaphorically bite the head off a raptor, go ahead and hit subscribe and maybe give this a like. It keeps the servers running and fuels my vindictive joy. Anyway, back to the execution. Chad, I said, ignoring the envelope. Do you know what runs on the Z-series mainframe in the basement? Old code, he scoffed. Spaghetti. That's why we're scrapping it. It's not just code, Chad. It's the clearinghouse interface. It's the Swift wire verifications. It's the biometric security protocol that adheres to the federal banking regulations regarding high-value transaction limits. You know, the laws that keep the SEC from turning this building into a crater. He waved a hand dismissively. We've got consultants for that. Deloitte is sending a squad on Monday. They'll scrape the logic, refactor it into Python, and we'll be live on AWS by Q3. I almost laughed. I really did. The sheer, unadulterated hubris was almost beautiful, like watching a drunk man try to juggle chainsaws. Deloitte. He thought a team of 22-year-old consultants who learned coding from YouTube tutorials could parse 30 years of assembly language and JCL scripting in a weekend. So, effective immediately? I asked. Effective immediately, Chad nodded. We need your badge and your laptop. Security will escort you out. Standard protocol, nothing personal. I stood up. My knees popped. A sound like a dry twig snapping in a dead forest. I smoothed out my skirt. I didn't look at the envelope. I reached into my purse and pulled out my ID badge, the chipped plastic card that had been my passport to the inner sanctum for 4 decades. I placed it on the table. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out my RSA hardware token, the little fob with the changing numbers. I placed it next to the badge. Is that everything? Chad asked, eyeing my purse as if I might be stealing staplers. That's everything the company owns, I said. I didn't mention the other thing. The thing they couldn't take. The thing that wasn't in my purse, but in the ridges of my thumb and the unique pattern of my iris. The biometric hash stored in the deepest, darkest, read-only sector of the mainframe's security kernel. The hash that I had hard-coded into the system 10 years ago after a Russian botnet tried to brute force our admin accounts. The hash that required my physical presence to authorize any changes to the core settlement logic. Chad didn't know about it. Why would he? He'd never read the documentation. He probably thought documentation was a Netflix genre. Good luck, Chad, I said. You're going to need it. We make our own luck, he grinned, tapping his temple. Disrupt or die, right? Something like that, I said. I walked out of the conference room. I walked past the open plan office where the junior developers sat on beanbag chairs, wearing noise-canceling headphones, typing code that would likely break the moment it touched real data. I walked to the elevator. I didn't look back. The security guard, an old-timer named Miller, looked surprised to see me with a cardboard box. Everything okay, Miss Weller? Fine, Miller, I said. Just upgrading my operating system. I walked out into the Jersey sunshine. It was gray and industrial, smelling of exhaust and wet pavement. It smelled like freedom. I got into my 2014 Honda Accord. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I adjusted the rearview mirror and checked my lipstick. Disrupt or die, I whispered to myself. I put the car in drive. I was going home to water my hydrangeas. And then I was going to wait, because I knew exactly how long it takes for a system to realize its heart has been ripped out. About 48 hours. Monday morning was going to be interesting. My garden is a lot like a mainframe if you think about it. It requires structure, patience, and the ruthless elimination of bugs. Saturday morning, I was knee-deep in mulch, pruning the deadheads off my hydrangeas. The soil was cool and damp under my gloves. It was the first time in 20 years I hadn't spent a Saturday morning checking the server logs over coffee. Usually, my weekends were punctuated by the phantom buzzing of my phone, alerts, warnings, the heartbeat of the bank. Today, the phone sat on the patio table, silent. It was a silence that felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I made tea, Earl Grey hot, not the kombucha sludge Chad was pumping into the veins of my department. I sat on my porch and watched a squirrel trying to break into the bird feeder. I named him Chad. He was persistent, annoying, and ultimately destined to fail because I had engineered that feeder with the same paranoia I applied to the bank's firewall. Around noon, the first text came through. It was from Danny, a junior engineer I'd hired 2 years ago. Danny was a good kid. He actually knew what a pointer was, which put him in the top 1% of the new hires. Pat, are you really gone? The Baines are here, the Baines. That's what we called the external consultants. They weren't always from Bain. They were all the same. Shiny suits, expensive laptops, and a complete lack of understanding of how a bank actually moves money. They were the locusts of the corporate world. I took a sip of tea and didn't reply. I could picture it perfectly. The conference room would be filled with whiteboards covered in meaningless diagrams, circles and arrows, synergy written in red marker. They would be talking about decoupling the monolith. They would be looking at my code, millions of lines of COBOL, JCL, and 6 transaction definitions, and treating it like toxic waste. They didn't understand that the monolith wasn't just a pile of rocks. It was a load-bearing wall. By Sunday evening, the modernization had begun. I knew this because my phone buzzed again. Another text from Danny. They're bypassing the staging environment. Chad says we need to move fast. He gave them root access to the dev partition. They're running scripts I've never seen. I felt a cold spike in my chest. Root access to the dev partition without a staging sandbox. It was the digital equivalent of doing open heart surgery with a chainsaw while riding a unicycle. I closed my eyes. I could see the system map in my head. It was a beautiful, complex web of dependencies. If you touched the customer master file, it rippled through to the loan servicing module. If you updated the loan module, it pinged the general ledger. And if the general ledger didn't get the handshake back within 0.05 seconds, it triggered the fraud lock. The fraud lock, that was the key. The fraud lock wasn't just a line of code, it was a biological gate. 10 years ago, after the Russian incident, the board had panicked. They wanted accountability. They wanted a human neck to choke if things went wrong. So, I gave them mine. I built a biometric authorization layer into the core update sequence for the settlement engine. To push a change to the production settlement logic, the code that actually moves the money out of the bank, you needed two things: a cryptographic key, which they had, and a biometric scan of the senior architect, which was currently pruning hydrangeas in New Jersey. They hadn't hit that wall yet. They were still playing in the shallow end, messing with the user interface, changing fonts, moving buttons. They thought they were swimming. They didn't realize they were paddling towards a waterfall. I went inside and cooked a risotto. Stirring rice is meditative. It requires constant attention, just like a batch process. You can't rush it. If you turn the heat up too high, you burn it. If you stop stirring, it glues together. Chad was the type of cook who would blast the heat, throw in the rice, and walk away to check his Instagram. Monday morning arrived with the grim inevitability of a kernel panic. I woke up at 6 a.m. out of habit. I showered, dressed in my retired lady uniform, yoga pants and a cashmere sweater, and sat down at my computer. I wasn't logging into the bank's VPN. That would be illegal, but I still had access to the public-facing status page. The one customers see, system status, all systems operational. Lies, I whispered to the screen. I knew what was happening inside that building. The consultants were probably high-fiving. They had likely refactored the login screen and pushed it live. Look at us, we're agile. We changed the color of the submit button to disruptive blue. But deep down in the basement, in the climate-controlled server room where the air is kept at a crisp 64 degrees, the mainframe was watching. It was seeing these new, unfamiliar commands coming down the pipe. It was checking its access control lists. It was looking for a fingerprint that wasn't there. It was waiting. And so was I. I poured another cup of Earl Grey. Danny, I thought, staring at my phone. Don't do it, kid. Don't try to fix it. Just let it burn. But I knew he wouldn't. He was too young. He still had hope. He still thought competence mattered. He was about to learn the hardest lesson of his career. You can't patch stupid. The cracks started showing on Tuesday. It wasn't a total collapse. Legacy systems don't usually explode all at once. They die by 1,000 cuts. It started with the audit logs. In banking, if you don't log a transaction, it didn't happen. And if it didn't happen but the money moved, that's not a bug, that's a felony. I was at the grocery store, debating between organic and non-organic avocados. Chad had ruined the concept of avocados for me, but I still liked guacamole when Danny called. Not a text, a call. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted to answer. The instinct to fix, to troubleshoot, to save the ship was burned into my DNA. But I looked at the avocados. They were firm, unyielding like me. I picked up. Hello, Danny. Pat, oh God, Pat, you have to help me. His voice was an octave higher than usual. He sounded like he was hyperventilating in a server closet. Calm down, Danny, breathe. What's wrong? The transaction IDs, he sputtered. They're skipping. We processed the morning batch, and the sequence numbers are jumping by tens of thousands. The compliance dashboard is lighting up like a Christmas tree, but Chad told us to suppress the warnings. Suppress the warnings? I repeated, my voice flat. He told you to mute the fire alarm while the house smells like smoke. He said it's just legacy noise. He said the new microservices handle indexing differently, and the old mainframe is just confused. He called the error logs boomer spaghetti in the stand-up meeting. Boomer spaghetti. I squeezed the avocado in my hand. It didn't yield, but my knuckles turned white. Listen to me carefully, Danny, I said, leaning against the display of artisanal crackers. Do not suppress those warnings. Print them out. Email them to your personal account. Document that you were ordered to ignore them. But how do I fix the sequence jump? The consultants are trying to force a reindex on the live database. They're doing what? I almost dropped the phone. Reindexing a live transactional database during business hours is suicide. It locks the tables. Nobody can read, nobody can write. The bank effectively freezes. Chad gave them the go-ahead. He said move fast and break things. Well, I said, a cold calm settling over me. He's definitely got the break things part down. Danny, listen, do nothing. Do not type a single command. If you touch that database while it's reindexing, you will corrupt the pointers. You will turn $2 billion of customer data into digital confetti. But the system is slowing down. The tellers are reporting latency. Let it slow down, I said. Go to lunch, Danny. Take a long lunch, Pat, please. Just tell me the override code for the table lock. I know you know it. I did know it. It was a hexadecimal string I had memorized in 1997. 0x4A unlock override auth PW. It would release the tables, cancel the reindex, and restore sanity. I can't help you, Danny, I said softly. I'm retired. Remember, I'm an anchor. You don't want an anchor dragging you down. Pat, I hung up. I stood there in the produce aisle, staring at the bananas. My heart was pounding. It went against everything I believed in to let a system fail. Spent my life keeping the lights on. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, and vacations to keep those lights on. But if I fixed it now, Chad would take the credit. He'd say his agile methodology solved the problem. He'd learn nothing. And next week, he'd do something worse. I put the avocado in my basket. By Wednesday, the small fires were becoming a blaze. Customers were tweeting. At Bank East Coast, why is my app showing a balance of $0.00? At Bank East Coast, I can't transfer rent money. Fix your app. I sat on my couch, sipping wine, scrolling through Twitter. The bank's official account was replying with copy-pasted apologies. We are experiencing intermittent technical difficulties as we upgrade our systems to serve you better. Serve you better by locking you out of your own money. Then came the internal leak. Someone, probably Danny, posted a screenshot on an anonymous IT forum. It showed the CPU usage of the mainframe. It was pinned at 99%. The consultants had deployed a Python script that was querying the entire transaction history for every single user login. It was a denial of service attack, and it was coming from inside the house. I watched the stock price dip, just a little, $0.45. Burn, I whispered. But the real show hadn't started yet. Tomorrow was Thursday, end of quarter. Thursday was settlement day. The day the bank had to reconcile its books with the Federal Reserve. The day massive wire transfers moved between institutions. The day the system had to be perfect, and the day the system would check for the biometric authorization of the senior architect. I checked my calendar. Thursday, 10 o'clock a.m. spa appointment. Perfect timing. Thursday morning dawned with the kind of crisp, clear blue sky that usually signals a good day for high-frequency trading. For Bank East Coast, however, it was the sky over a battlefield. Quarterly settlement is not a joke. It's not an agile sprint. It is a hard, federally mandated deadline. By 4 o'clock p.m. EST, billions of dollars in commercial wires, international clearings, and interbank settlements must be finalized. If the ledger doesn't balance, or if the transmission doesn't go through, the fines start at painful and quickly escalate to congressional hearing. I was at a day spa in Cherry Hill, wearing a fluffy white robe and sipping cucumber water. My phone was in a locker, turned off. At the bank, I knew exactly what the sequence of events was. 0800 a.m., the batch jobs kick off. The mainframe begins aggregating the millions of transactions from the last 90 days. This usually takes 2 hours. With the optimizations Chad's team had likely installed, it was probably choking on its own vomit. 10 o'clock a.m., the first warning bells. The verification hashes wouldn't match. Why? Because the consultants had probably changed the character encoding on the database from EBDIC, which mainframes love, to UTF-8, which mainframes tolerate but despise, without updating the translation tables. 11 o'clock a.m., panic. The settlement window opens. Wires need to start moving, but the system is locked in a verify loop. At 11:15 a.m., I was getting a hot stone massage. The masseuse, a lovely woman named Brenda, asked me if my shoulders were tense. Not anymore, Brenda, I murmured into the face cradle. Not anymore. Back at the office, Chad would be screaming. I could hear it. He'd be standing in the network operations center knock, his Patagonia vest damp with sweat. Just force it, he'd be yelling. Override the check, we have to send the file? And that's when they would try it. The emergency override. The emergency override is a function I wrote. It exists for exactly this scenario, when the automated checks fail and a human needs to say, I have visually verified the data, and I authorize this transfer despite the errors. But you can't just click OK on a box like that. Not for $2 billion. The command requires elevated privileges. Sysadmin level 5. There was only one level 5 account active. Mine. 12:30 p.m. I walked out of the spa glowing. My skin felt hydrated. My soul felt light. I turned my phone on, it vibrated instantly, and then it kept vibrating. It danced across the bench in the locker room like a possessed object. 47 missed calls, 12 voicemails, 88 texts. I scrolled through them. Chad, 12:05 p.m., Patricia pickup. Chad, 12:08 p.m., we have a situation. Chad, 12:15 p.m., need password for override. Chad, 12:20 p.m., seriously pick up the phone. Danny, 12:30 p.m., it's the biometrics, Pat. The screen says authorization required, senior architect biometrics. Chad is losing his mind. He tried to pseudo past it. The system locked him out entirely. I smiled. A cold, thin smile. The Russian protocol. When the system detects an unauthorized attempt to bypass the level 5 security check, like, say, a frantic CTO trying to pseudo force a settlement, it doesn't just say access denied. It assumes a hostile intrusion. It goes into fortress mode. It locks the file system. It disconnects the external gateways. It freezes the assets. And it displays a single prompt on the main console. Critical security lockdown awaiting biometric verification. User P. Weller timeout in 3 hours 59 minutes. If the biometric scan isn't received within 4 hours, the system assumes the facility has been compromised. It initiates a hard wipe of the encryption keys. The data remains, but it becomes unreadable without a restore from physical tape backups held in a mountain in Colorado. That recovery takes 3 days. The bank would be dead in 3 days. My phone rang again. It wasn't Chad this time. The caller ID said, Franklin P. Sterling, chairman of the board. Franklin was 70 years old. He was old money. He didn't know what Kubernetes was, but he knew what fear smelled like. I let it ring 3 times, then I answered. Hello, Franklin, long time. Patricia, his voice was shaking, not anger. Terror, where are you? I'm in Cherry Hill. Just finished a lovely facial. Why? The system? It's asking for your thumb. Literally. Chad says we can't move the money without you. Oh, that, I said, checking my nails. That's the fraud prevention protocol. I documented that in 2014, Franklin, page 402 of the Disaster Recovery Manual. You signed off on it. Patricia, we have 2 hours before the Fed window closes. If we miss this settlement, we are insolvent. We are talking regulatory seizure. That sounds serious, Franklin. Name your price, he snapped. Just come in. Send a helicopter. I don't like helicopters, I said, and I'm retired. I turned in my badge, remember? Chad was very specific about the immediate nature of my departure. Patricia, please, stop the games. What do you want? I looked at the time. 1:00 p.m. Plenty of time to drive there if I took the turnpike. I want a meeting, I said, in the boardroom with the full board and Chad. In 1 hour. Done, Franklin said. Just get here. Oh, and Franklin, yes. Have security print a visitor pass. I don't have a badge anymore. I hung up. I got into my Honda. I didn't speed. I put on a podcast about gardening. The traffic was light. The world was burning and I was bringing the only fire extinguisher. But I wasn't going to spray it for free. The drive to the bank usually took 45 minutes. I took my time. I stopped for coffee, a real one, not the break room sludge. When I pulled into the visitor parking lot, I saw the chaos through the glass facade of the lobby. People were running, actual running. In a bank, nobody runs unless there's a gunman or a fire. This was worse. This was a liquidity crisis. I walked to the front desk. Miller, the security guard, was standing there, looking pale. He saw me and looked like he wanted to hug me. Miss Weller, thank God. They've been calling down here every 5 minutes asking if you've arrived. Hello, Miller, I said, handing him my driver's license. Visitor pass, please. He fumbled with the printer. They said to just send you up, Protocol Miller, I said gently. Visitor pass. I don't work here. He printed the sticker. It said Patricia Weller guest. I stuck it on my cashmere sweater right over my heart. The elevator ride to the 40th floor was silent. I watched the numbers tick up. 10, 20, 30. With each floor, the value of my obsolete knowledge compounded. By the time I hit 40, I was probably the most expensive consultant on the Eastern Seaboard. The elevator doors opened directly into the executive suite. The receptionist was gone. The double doors to the boardroom were open. I walked in. The room was a tableau of despair. The long mahogany table was littered with empty water bottles, half-eaten sandwiches, and laptops displaying red graphs. The entire board of directors was there. Franklin Sterling sat at the head, looking like he had aged 10 years since our phone call, and there was Chad. Chad was standing by the window, staring out at the city. His Patagonia vest was unzipped, his hair was messy. He turned when I walked in. His face was gray. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow, haunted look of a man who realizes he has destroyed his own future. Patricia, Franklin said, standing up. Thank you for coming. I didn't sit down. I stood at the end of the table, a handbag over my arm. I didn't come to socialize, Franklin. I heard you had a technical issue. It's the biometric lock, Chad croaked. His voice was cracked. We tried to bypass it. We tried to restore from backup, but the latency? You can't restore from backup while the system is in fortress mode, I said, speaking to him like a teacher correcting a slow child. It encrypts the write heads. Did you not read the README emergency TXT file in the root directory? Chad looked down at his shoes. I didn't see it, of course you didn't. I turned to Franklin. You have about? I checked my watch. 90 minutes before the Fed window closes. If I don't authenticate by then, the encryption keys wipe. The bank goes dark. Monday morning, the FDIC is putting tape on the doors. We know, Franklin said. Fix it, please. I can fix it, I said. It will take me about 30 seconds to scan my thumb and retina. The system will recognize the senior architect, unlock the file system, and process the queue. The backlog will clear in about 20 minutes. Then do it, a board member shouted from the back. I can't, I said simply. The room went deadly silent. Why not? Franklin asked. Because the system requires the biometric authorization of an active employee with level 5 clearance, I lied. It didn't actually check employment status. The mainframe didn't talk to HR. They didn't know that. I am not an employee. You fired me. If I scan my hand now as a civilian, the system might interpret it as a spoofing attack and accelerate the wipe. Technically, that could happen if I hadn't calibrated the sensitivity. But mostly I was just twisting the knife. So we hire you back, Franklin said, right now. Reinstated, full salary. No, I said. Chad looked up. Pat, please, I'm sorry. Okay, I was wrong. The legacy stuff. It's harder than I thought. It's not legacy stuff, Chad. It's the foundation. You tried to build a penthouse on a foundation you were actively dynamiting. I reached into my bag. I didn't pull out a weapon, but the effect was the same. I pulled out a stapled document. I prepared a contract, I said. It's a consultancy agreement. I slid it down the long table. It hissed across the mahogany and stopped in front of Franklin. Consultancy? Franklin squinted at it. Don't want to be an employee, I said. Employees can be fired by 25-year-old CTOs who think mainframe is a dirty word. I want to be an external contractor. Independent, irrevocable. Franklin put on his reading glasses. The rate? He choked. Patricia, this is? Check the math, Franklin, I said. It's a lot less than the fine you'll pay the SEC if that wire doesn't go out in 89 minutes. Franklin looked at the paper, then at the clock, then at Chad. And one more thing, I said. Look at Clause 4. Franklin read Clause 4. He went pale. He looked at Chad. Chad looked confused. What is it? Clause 4. Franklin read aloud, his voice flat. The consultant shall report directly to the board of directors. The position of chief technology officer shall be restructured to report to the consultant for all matters regarding core infrastructure. Chad's eyes widened. You want me to report to you? No, I said. I don't want you to report to me, Chad. I don't want to talk to you at all. Clause 4 says you don't touch the mainframe. Ever. You can play with your apps. You can make the buttons blue. But the adults are talking now. I looked at Franklin. Clock's ticking, Frank. The silence in the boardroom was heavy, broken only by the hum of the HVAC system, another piece of legacy infrastructure they probably ignored until it broke. Franklin stared at the contract. It was a businessman. He understood leverage. He knew he was staring at a hostage note, but the hostage was his own bank. Patricia, Franklin started trying to summon some of his old negotiating power. This retainer, it's substantial. $500 an hour, with a guaranteed minimum of 40 hours a week, plus a quarterly retention bonus, I added, for maintaining the biometric availability. This is extortion, the board member in the back muttered. No. I turned to face him. It was Jenkins. He had voted for the outsourcing deal last year. Extortion is illegal. This is supply and demand. You have a demand for a thumb that opens a $2 billion lock. I supply the thumb. The price is the price. I walked over to the window, standing next to Chad. He smelled like fear and dry shampoo. You know, I said, looking out at the city skyline. When I wrote the code for the settlement engine in 1998, I told the board then that we needed a redundant team. I said we needed to train successors. Do you know what they said? Nobody answered. They said it was too expensive. They said, Patricia, you're the best, just handle it. I turned back to the room, so I handled it. I built it so secure that not even God could move money without me. You didn't pay for redundancy then. You're paying for it now with interest. Franklin looked at the legal aid, young woman who looked like she wanted to be literally anywhere else. Is this enforceable? She skimmed the document. It's standard independent contractor language, sir. Except for Clause 7. Clause 7? Chad asked. Clause 7 states that the biometric access is non-transferable, and that any attempt to coerce, bypass, or replicate the consultant's biometric data constitutes a breach of contract, resulting in an immediate termination fee of, she gulped, $5 million. That was hard-coded for fraud liability compliance, I said smoothly. Remember, we needed to ensure that no one could force me to approve a transfer at gunpoint. If the contract is breached, the liability shifts to the bank. You signed off on the original logic, Franklin. I'm just codifying it. It was beautiful. I was using their own compliance rules against them. The biometric system was designed to prevent a criminal from forcing me to steal money. Now, it was preventing the board from forcing me to work for free. Chad finally spoke up. He looked desperate. Franklin, we can't do this. She's hijacking the department. If she controls the core, my modernization strategy is dead. We can't be agile if we have to ask permission from a consultant every time we push code. Franklin looked at Chad, and he looked at the red numbers on the screen projected on the wall. Time to settlement failure, 01-12-00. Chad, Franklin said quietly. Shut up. Chad's mouth snapped shut. Franklin picked up a Montblanc pen. If we sign this, you unlock the system immediately? Immediately, I said. And you train a successor? I will train a team, I corrected, properly. Not boot camp graduates. I'll hire real engineers who understand memory management and race conditions. It will take 2 years. 2 years, Franklin sighed. He looked at the contract again. He looked at the terrified faces of his board. He looked at the potential ruin of his reputation. He signed. He slid the paper across the table. Welcome back, Patricia, he said, his voice devoid of warmth but full of resignation. I picked up the contract. I checked the signature. I folded it neatly and put it in my purse. Thank you, Franklin. I look forward to our quarterly reviews. I turned to Chad. Give me your laptop. What? Chad blinked. I need a terminal to access the admin console, unless you want me to go down to the basement? That might take 10 minutes. We don't have 10 minutes. Chad hesitated, then handed over his sleek, sticker-covered MacBook. I opened it. The keyboard was sticky, gross. I opened the terminal. I typed in the IP address of the mainframe gateway. The familiar green-on-black text appeared. Authorization required, Senior Architect Biometrics. I held up my right thumb. I pressed it against the external scanner attached to the podium, the one they used for board votes. I routed the signal through the tunnel. The room held its breath. A green LED blinked on the scanner. On the screen, the text changed. Identity verified. Weller, P. Access granted. Fortress mode disengaged. Resuming batch processing. A collective sigh swept through the room, loud enough to be a wind gust. It's processing, I said, watching the lines of code scroll by like a waterfall. The queue is draining. You'll hit the Fed window with about 8 minutes to spare. I closed the laptop and pushed it back to Chad. You should really clean your keyboard, Chad, I said. Hygiene is important, in code and in life. The tension in the room dissipated, replaced by the exhausted slump of adrenaline withdrawal. Board members were loosening ties, checking phones, whispering to each other. They had survived, but I wasn't done. I remained standing. The consultant title wasn't just a pay raise, it was a shield. I looked at the whiteboard where Chad had drawn his architecture of the future. It was a mess of buzzwords, data lake, serverless, synergy. I walked over to the board, picked up an eraser, and wiped a single line through the center of his diagram. We need to establish some ground rules, I said. My voice carried. I didn't need to shout. I held the keys now. Franklin looked up, rubbing his temples. We signed the contract, Patricia. What else? Operations, I said. Effective immediately, no code touches the mainframe without my code review. Not a script, not a patch, not a font change. If Chad's team wants to pull data, use the read-only APIs I built in 2005. They do not query the database directly. Ever. That will slow down our development cycle. Chad protested, trying to rally. We have features promised for Q4, the mobile wallet integration. The mobile wallet can wait, I said. Solvency cannot. I looked at Jenkins, the board member who had called it extortion. Jenkins, do you remember 2009? He looked uncomfortable. The DDoS attack? The DDoS attack, I nodded. Christmas Eve. Russian hackers hit the firewall with 40 gigabits of traffic. The entire network was buckling. Everyone went home. Who stayed? Jenkins looked at the table. You did. I stayed for 36 hours, I said. I rewrote the packet filtering rules by hand in real time while the attack was happening. I routed the traffic into a black hole I built on the fly. I saved this bank $40 million in fraud that night. And do you know what I got? A bonus? Someone guessed. I got a mug, I said, a branded travel mug. It leaked. I let that hang in the air. I'm not doing this for mug anymore. This contract isn't just about money. It's about respect for the complexity of what keeps this place alive. You treat technology like it's a commodity, like you can buy it by the pound. It's not. It's a nervous system. You just tried to perform a lobotomy with a spoon. Franklin sighed. He looked at Chad, who was shrinking in his chair. Chad, Franklin said, you're off the infrastructure committee. What? Chad stood up. But I'm the CTO. Not for long, perhaps, Franklin muttered. Patricia is right. We came too close. You're reassigned to the customer experience division. Focus on the app colors. Leave the plumbing to Patricia. But sit down, Chad, Franklin barked. It was the first time I'd heard him raise his voice at the boy wonder. I felt a warm glow in my chest. It wasn't just victory, it was justice. It was for every engineer who had been told their work was obsolete by someone who couldn't parse a CSV file. I'll need an office, I said, not a cubicle, an office. With a door. Take the corner one, Franklin said. It was intended for the new vice president of innovation. We won't be hiring one. Good, I said, and I want my old team back. Danny, Sarah, and bring Miller up from security. He needs a raise, and I need someone at the door who knows my name. Fine, Franklin waved his hand. Whatever you want, just keep the green light on. I looked at the screen on the wall. The progress bar was at 98%. Settlement complete. Funds transferred, $2,140,500,000 and 0 cents status, balanced. Pleasure doing business with you, I said. I picked up my purse. I walked past Chad. He looked like he was about to cry. Don't worry, Chad, I whispered as I passed him. You can still scrunch, just not on my servers. I walked out of the boardroom. The air in the hallway felt different. It wasn't stale anymore. It felt like my air. I checked my phone, 3:45 p.m. I could still make it back to Cherry Hill for a late lunch. I had a sudden craving for a very expensive steak. The following Monday, the atmosphere at Bank East Coast had shifted. The move fast and break things posters had been taken down. In their place was a palpable sense of caution. I arrived at 9 a.m. I parked in the spot marked reserved, which used to belong to the VP of Innovation. When I walked onto the IT floor, the silence was instant. The junior developers usually had their heads bobbing to techno music, stopped typing. They looked at me with a mix of fear and awe. I wasn't just the old lady from the basement anymore. I was the one who had brought the board to its knees. Chad was nowhere to be seen. Rumor had it his office had been moved to the annex building, the one next to the parking garage where the HVAC is loud and the Wi-Fi is spotty. He was now the head of digital aesthetics. He was in charge of fonts. It was a fitting purgatory. I walked straight to the network operations center. Danny was there staring at a monitor. He looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. Pat, he whispered when he saw me. Is it true you're back? I'm consulting, Danny, I said, putting my bag down on a desk. It pays better. And I don't have to attend HR seminars. He looked at me like I was a superhero. The system? It stabilized immediately after you scanned. What did you do? I authorized the batch, I said, and then I rolled back the consultant's changes. All of them were back on the version 4.2 kernel, but that's the 2018 build, Danny said. Exactly, I said, it works. We'll upgrade when we have a plan, not a hallucination. I clapped my hands. All right, everyone, listen up. The room of 20-somethings turned to face me. My name is Patricia. I am the senior architect for the last month, who have been led to believe that speed is the only metric that matters. That is a lie. In this building, accuracy is the only metric that matters. If you move fast and lose money, you are not a disruptor. You are a liability. I pointed to the main screen, which was now showing a healthy, steady stream of green transaction logs. We are going to do a code review, I announced. We are going to go through every single script those consultants left behind. If it doesn't have comments, we delete it. If it doesn't have error handling, we delete it. If it imports a library you didn't vet yourself, we delete it. Am I clear? Yes, ma'am, a chorus of voices replied. It was music to my ears. I spent the rest of the day in the server room. The physical sensation of the cold air, the hum of the fans, the blinking lights, it was comforting. I scanned my thumb to unlock the rack. The beep was a friendly greeting. I found the consultant server. Blade server they had slotted in without proper mounting screws. It was vibrating. I pulled it out, hot-swapped it right out of the chassis. The screen flickered, then stabilized. Garbage collection, I muttered, tossing the blade onto a pile of junk. Danny came over. Pat, can I ask you something? Shoot. Why did you come back? You had the perfect exit. You could have let it burn. I looked at the server rack. I looked at the cables, neatly zip-tied by me years ago. 'Cause I built this, Danny, I said. It's ugly, it's old, it's written in a language nobody speaks anymore, but it feeds families, it pays mortgages, it keeps the lights on for millions of people. You don't burn down a house just because you don't like the wallpaper. Danny nodded. Can you teach me the real stuff, JCL? VSAM? I smiled. Grab a chair, kid, and get me a tea. Earl Grey, hot. Chad was gone. The parasites were purged. And for the first time in years, the system was safe. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more message to leave. One final safeguard to ensure that even after I was truly gone, years from now, they would never forget who held the keys. 3 months later, the bank was boring again. Boring is good. Boring means the money is safe. I only came into the office on Tuesdays and Thursdays now. The rest of the time, I worked from my garden, monitoring the logs on a secure, encrypted tablet that the bank paid for. Chad eventually quit. He pursued other opportunities at a crypto startup that went bankrupt 6 weeks later. I didn't send a card. The board of directors treated me with a terrifying level of respect. When I walked into a meeting, conversations stopped. They knew that the woman in the cashmere sweater held the kill switch for their entire operation. On my final day of the initial restabilization phase, I prepared a document. It wasn't code, it was a binder, thick, heavy, and bound in black leather. I walked into the boardroom. It was empty. I placed the binder in the exact center of the table. The cover read, System Life Cycle and Succession Plan Confidential. Inside, I hadn't just documented the code. I had documented the philosophy. I wrote about the necessity of friction, why systems should be hard to change, why legacy isn't an insult but a testament to survival. And on the last page, I left a little surprise. I had updated the biometric lock. It wasn't just me anymore. I had added a second requirement. To authorize a level 5 change, the system now required 1. The biometric scan of the senior consultant, me. 2. The countersign of a qualified junior architect. I had promoted Danny. He didn't know it yet, but his thumbprint was now the second key to the kingdom. If they ever wanted to fire me again, they'd have to fire him too, and Danny was loyal. I'd made sure of that. I walked out of the building. The air was crisp. Fall was coming to New Jersey. The leaves were turning the color of money and rust. I got into my Honda. I checked my bank account app. The quarterly retainer had just hit. The number was large, comically large. I tapped the steering wheel. System secured, I said. I drove home. I had hydrangeas to prune. And for the first time in 40 years, I wasn't worried about the phone ringing. Let it ring. I'm a consultant now. I charge for after-hours calls. And if they ever try to replace me with an AI or a blockchain or a Chad, well, good luck to them. I know where the off switch is. Real power doesn't announce itself. Patricia simply let the silence of the mainframe speak volumes, then she set her own terms. Ignoring decades of expertise comes with a steep price. True value always finds its way back to the top. Appreciate you all for sticking through this one. See you in the next story.